first night I heard the second set of footsteps, I told myself it was just the echo of my own. The hallway in the assisted living facility was long and polished to a dull shine, and at 2 a.m. it felt less like a workplace and more like a tunnel that had no end. I was halfway through my usual rounds, clipboard tucked under my arm, counting doors like I always did, 12 on the left, 12 on the right, when I noticed the rhythm was wrong. My shoes made a soft rubber whisper against the floor, but between each step there was another one, lighter, slightly delayed, as if someone was trying to match my pace and missing by half a second. I stopped walking. The second set stopped too. I waited, listening to the old building breathe, to the distant hum of vending machines and oxygen concentrators, to the soft snore drifting from behind one of the doors. Nothing else moved. I started again, slower this time, and there it was. Step, step, mine, then the other. I didn't turn around. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want to confirm that the hallway behind me was empty. Maybe I didn't want to see that it wasn't. By the time I reached the end of the corridor, the second set of footsteps had faded into the soft mechanical buzz of the lights overhead, and I convinced myself it had been the acoustics, the kind of thing that happens when you're alone too long in a quiet place. The night shift does something to your sense of scale. Rooms feel deeper, shadows stretch farther. Every sound seems to carry intention. I'd taken the job because I needed something steady, something calm, and overnight work at an assisted living facility sounded peaceful. The residents slept, the nurses handled anything medical, and my job was mostly security and paperwork. The supervisor who trained me, a woman named Carla, had given me exactly 3 rules before she left me alone on my first night. Don't enter a resident's room unless they call for help. Don't use the old elevator at the end of the West Wing, and if you ever hear someone knocking from inside the walls, report it in the log, but do not investigate. She'd said it casually, like she was listing the Wi-Fi password. I'd laughed, waiting for her to smile. She didn't. The old elevator had a yellow out-of-order sign taped across its doors, the paper curling at the edges like it had been there for years. It sat at the far end of the West Wing, past the last resident room, where the lights were slightly dimmer and the air felt cooler. I didn't have any reason to go down there that first week, so I didn't. I stuck to my routine. Check doors, log temperatures, make coffee around 3, watch the security monitors in the small office near the front entrance. The cameras covered the main halls, the lobby, the parking lot, and the West Wing, though the camera at the very end of that corridor always showed a faint distortion, like heat rippling off pavement. I assumed it was just a faulty feed. On my 4th night, Mrs. Delaney in room 114 pressed her call button at 2:17 a.m. exactly. She always pressed it at 2:17. I don't know how she managed that kind of precision, but the log showed it every night I worked. When I reached her room and asked what she needed, she just stared past me into the hallway and whispered, "You shouldn't let him stand there." I turned, heart thudding, and of course there was no one in the corridor. "Let who stand there?" I asked gently. She blinked as if waking up. "The tall one," she said, then lay back down and pulled her blanket to her chin. I noted it in the log as confusion due to age-related memory issues. That's what you're supposed to do. Give things clinical names so they fit in the right box. It was later that night, during my last round, that I realized the door at the end of the West Wing, the one just before the old elevator, was slightly open. It wasn't a resident room. It was marked storage in faded black letters. I was certain it had been closed earlier. I remember because I always checked the handle out of habit, making sure it was locked. Now it stood ajar by an inch, dark inside. I told myself not to be dramatic. Buildings settle. Doors shift. I walked down the corridor, and with each step the air felt heavier, like the temperature had dropped a few degrees. When I reached the storage room, I pushed the door open fully and flicked on the light. Shelves of linens and cleaning supplies greeted me. Nothing unusual, no one inside. But as I turned to leave, I noticed something scratched into the back of the door at eye level. 4 vertical lines, crossed through by a 5th. A tally mark. Fresh. The paint around it was splintered and pale. I ran my thumb over the grooves. They hadn't been there before, I would have noticed. I told myself it was probably maintenance or a bored staff member. But when I got back to the office and checked the West Wing camera feed, the distortion at the end of the hall had spread slightly, obscuring the door to the storage room. It looked almost like a shadow, but thicker. I didn't mention it to anyone. Night shift has an unspoken understanding. You don't bring up things that can't be explained unless they interfere with your ability to work. The footsteps continued every night after that. Never loud, never fast, always just half a beat behind me. I tested it once by stopping abruptly and spinning around. The hallway was empty, but I could have sworn I felt a shift in the air, like something had narrowly avoided colliding with me. Around my 2nd month, the knocking started. It was faint and irregular, coming from somewhere behind the walls in the West Wing. Not pipes, not the predictable ticking of expansion and contraction. It sounded deliberate. 3 knocks, pause, 2 knocks. Long pause, then nothing for hours. I logged it like Carla had told me to, writing auditory anomaly, source undetermined. The next morning, when I checked the logbook, my entry had been underlined in red pen. No comment, just the line, underlined. I asked the day supervisor if anyone had looked into the knocking. He frowned at me like I'd asked something inappropriate. Old buildings make old sounds, he said. Don't let it get to you. The tall one, Mrs. Delaney, had said. I started paying attention to reflections after that, in the glossy surface of the medication cart, in the darkened TV screens mounted in common areas. I would catch the faint impression of something elongated behind me, a shape that stretched higher than the door frames. But every time I turned, there was nothing there. It wasn't a solid figure. It was more like an absence, a vertical blur where the light seemed to thin out. The old elevator doors changed on a Tuesday. I know it was Tuesday because that's when the bakery across the street left unsold bread in the staff room. I walked past the West Wing and noticed the yellow's out of order sign was gone. The doors were closed, metal dull and unremarkable, but the call button beside them was lit with a soft amber glow. I stood there for a long time staring at that light. I'd never seen it on before. My first instinct was to press it. My second was to remember Carla's rule. Don't use the old elevator. She hadn't said it was broken. She'd said don't use it. There's a difference. I backed away and returned to the main hall. That night the footsteps were closer than ever. So close that I could feel a faint vibration through the soles of my shoes, like someone matching my stride perfectly now. No delay, just step for step. When I reached the security office, I shut the door and locked it, something I'd never done before. The monitors flickered faintly. On the West Wing feed, the distortion had expanded to cover the elevator doors entirely. The amber light still glowed through it, a small, steady eye. At 2:17 a.m., Mrs. Delaney pressed her call button. I hesitated before going to her room. When I arrived, she was sitting upright, staring at the corner of the ceiling. "He's closer," she said before I could speak. "You let him get closer." I asked her who she meant, even though I already knew. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and her expression shifted from confusion to pity. "You hear him walking," she said softly. "He likes that you pretend you don't." That was the first story. I left that job 3 months later after the elevator doors opened by themselves at the end of my shift, revealing nothing but a darkness that didn't reflect the overhead lights, a darkness that seemed to lean forward slightly, as if considering stepping out. The second night shift job was at a 24-hour gas station on the edge of town, the kind of place truckers stop at around 3 in the morning when the highway feels endless. I took it because I needed something different, something bright and open, somewhere with fewer hallways. The store was mostly glass, fluorescent lights humming constantly, refrigerators lining the back wall with rows of drinks that cast a cold blue glow. My manager, a tired-looking man named Ravi, told me there was only one real rule: never go into the storage freezer alone after midnight. "Why?" I asked. He shrugged. "Inventory accidents," he said. "Just wait for morning staff." The first few weeks were uneventful. Customers came and went. The security cameras covered every angle of the store and the pumps outside. Around 1:30 a.m., things would quiet down, and I'd stand behind the counter scrolling on my phone or wiping already clean surfaces. It was during one of those quiet stretches that I noticed something strange about the camera labeled ISIL 3. The shelf in that aisle held snack cakes and chips. Nothing special. But on the monitor, the end of the aisle always appeared slightly darker than it should have been. Not a shadow exactly, more like the light didn't quite reach the back wall. I walked down the aisle to check. Everything looked normal in person. Bright. Clean. But when I returned to the counter and looked at the screen again, the darkness was still there, occupying the last 2 feet of the frame. I adjusted the camera angle. The darkness adjusted with it. I told myself it was a glitch. Around 2:45 a.m., the freezer door at the back of the store would sometimes rattle softly, like someone testing the handle from the inside. The first time it happened, I nearly dropped the register drawer. I walked halfway toward it, then remembered Ravi's rule. Don't go into the storage freezer alone after midnight. The rattling stopped as soon as I stepped into the back hallway. I stood there, listening to the hum of compressors and the faint tick of cooling metal. Nothing else moved. When I checked the temperature log the next morning, the freezer had maintained a steady reading all night. No fluctuations, no signs of malfunction. The camera for ISIL 3 began to change subtly over time. The darkness deepened, inching forward until it covered half the aisle on screen, though in reality the shelves remained fully lit. One night, a regular customer named Elena came in around 3 for her usual coffee. As she walked past ISIL 3, she paused and leaned slightly to the side, peering down it. "Did you move the lights?" she asked casually. "No," I said. "Why?" She hesitated. "Just looks dimmer back there." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the refrigerators. After she left, I stared at the monitor. The darkness had reached the midpoint of the aisle, stopping just short of the camera's field of view, as if aware of its boundary. At exactly 3:33 a.m., the freezer door rattled again, harder this time. The metal handle clanged against the frame in a sharp, deliberate rhythm. 3 times. Pause. 3 times. I stayed behind the counter, hands gripping the edge until my knuckles ached. The store was empty. The highway outside was silent. On the monitor, ISIL 3 was now almost entirely black. And then, slowly, a shape formed within it. Not solid, not detailed. Just a taller patch of absence that seemed to tilt slightly, as if noticing the camera noticing it. I quit that job after I reviewed footage from a night I didn't remember. According to the timestamp at 3:12 a.m., I'd walked out from behind the counter, stood at the mouth of ISIL 3, and remained there for 11 full minutes, without moving. On the video, the darkness had parted around me like mist, and when I finally turned back toward the camera, my posture looked subtly wrong, shoulders slightly too high, head angled, just a fraction too far to the side. I don't remember any of it. The third night shift was as a remote security monitor for a small office building downtown. I worked alone in a windowless room, watching feeds from different floors. It should have been simple, quiet, predictable. There were no rules this time, at least none spoken. Just watch the screens and call authorities if anything unusual appears. It was the kind of job where hours pass unnoticed. Around 1 a.m., I began noticing that one of the cameras on the 4th floor would occasionally display a figure at the end of the hallway, not moving, just standing there. When I'd switch to another angle covering the same hallway, the figure would be gone. I assumed it was a reflection from the glass doors at the far end. But reflections don't remain when the lights shut off automatically at 2 a.m. One night I watched as the lights on the 4th floor clicked off row by row, plunging the corridor into darkness. The figure remained, not illuminated, just visible, like a cutout against deeper black. I leaned closer to the monitor, heart thudding. The timestamp read 2:07 a.m. Slowly, the figure raised one arm and pointed directly at the camera. The feed flickered, and for a split second, the image switched to my own monitoring room. I saw myself sitting there staring at the screen. Behind me, in the reflection of the dark monitor to my left, something tall stood just out of frame. When the feed returned to normal, the hallway was empty. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. The last night shift I ever took was at a small motel off a rural highway. The owner was an elderly man who slept in a room behind the front desk and trusted me to handle late check-ins. There were only 12 rooms, arranged in a U-shape around a cracked asphalt parking lot. Business was slow. Most nights no one came after midnight. The rule here was simple. If room 9 calls the front desk phone, let it ring. "It's a wiring issue," the owner said. "Happens sometimes, don't answer." On my first night at exactly 4:04 a.m., the phone rang once. I stared at it, pulse racing. The display showed room 9. It rang again and again. I let it ring until it stopped. In the morning, I checked the registry. Room 9 was unoccupied. It had been unoccupied for months due to plumbing repairs. The next night, I stepped outside around 3 to get some air. The parking lot was empty, the highway distant and quiet. As I turned back toward the office, I noticed the curtain in room 9 twitch slightly, as if someone inside had just let it fall back into place. I stood there for a long time, watching. The curtain didn't move again. At 4:04 a.m., the phone rang. I let it ring. On the third night, I heard footsteps crunching slowly across the gravel outside the office door. Step, step, perfectly spaced, familiar. They stopped just outside. The handle didn't turn, no knock came, just silence. When I finally gathered the courage to glance at the security monitor, the camera facing the parking lot showed nothing. Empty asphalt. But the audio meter flickered faintly, picking up the softest trace of breathing. At 4:04 a.m., the phone rang. This time, after the third ring, I picked it up. I didn't say hello. I just listened. For a few seconds, there was nothing. Then, faintly, I heard footsteps. My footsteps, rubber soles against polished floor, a hallway stretching into darkness. I hung up immediately, hands shaking. The rest of the night passed without incident, but as dawn approached and the sky began to lighten, I looked out toward room 9-1 last time. The door stood slightly ajar, just an inch. I don't work nights anymore. I found a daytime job with windows and noise and people everywhere. But sometimes, when the office is quiet and I walk down a long corridor alone, I hear it again. Step, step, perfectly matched. And if I stop walking, it stops too, waiting patiently behind me, as if it knows I'll eventually have to move again.